All right. Welcome, everyone, to episode 24 of Ty's Training, Talking with My Dad. This is the week of June 30th, 2025. I'm Ty, and here, as always, with my co-host and father, Mr. Tim Andrews, a.k.a. Mr. C, for another look at training and life ahead of Project Himalaya. We are here, well, I am here in Quito, Ecuador. It's a beautiful sunny day. Just got back from training, and yeah, vibes are good. Good down here. Mr. C, how's it going up there?
Good. Yeah, it's beautiful. We've had 3 incredibly beautiful summertime days, not too high in humidity and highs in the mid 80s and lots of sunshine. Hard to argue.
Nice. Excellent.
Yep. Flowers are
Excellent.
blooming.
Well,
It's just wonderful.
good time to be there.
Great time to be alive. Yep. Okay, time for the numbers.
All right. Well, this week, I would say kind of the first full bigger week of vert. So 100 kilometers, just under, in 13,000 meters of vert, 25 hours of training time. So yeah, it was a really good week. I feel like I'm finally kind of caught up from the Colorado trip and also just like all of June. And yeah, finally getting into a nice swing of things here in Quito. It feels good to be getting back into the routine.
Good. And just so I can be agape once more and remind our audience, 13,000 meters is a Mount Everest and a half, approximately. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. Close enough.
Yeah, that's a lot of meters. Yep. Okay.
It's a good amount of meters.
Okay.
But again, I will be upfront, which is like a lot of that, especially this week, was cheating, was, uphill only vert, because some of it was, on treadmills when I was traveling, or, I've done a couple days where I've taken the cable car down from Ruku and run up. So that cuts off like 1,000 meters of descent almost. It's a lot. It's not quite as flashy as it probably looks, because there are ways to kind of sneak around the skipping the downhill, which I think can be helpful sometimes, especially when you're early season and getting back into it. So yeah, just full disclosure there for our audience.
Okay. So what you're trying to say is you're an incredible slacker because you're running more uphill of this ridiculous
Exactly.
amount of vertical.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, just so we're clear.
Slacking. Yep.
Slacking, yeah. Okay. Especially because you're running more the harder effort way. I mean, yes, I guess you could say set for runners, it's harder to run downhill, maybe for some of us, but still gravity is on your side, at least coming downhill.
Yeah, I mean, aerobically it can be easier, but it's definitely harder on the body, which is why I skip it sometimes. It's harder on the joints and muscles and things like that.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. All right. Back to the task at hand here.
Yeah.
I just still can't believe it. It just blows my mind. Okay. So last week, when we were talking, we had some conversation about your whatever it was that hit you in the ribs and hurt you in your vest. And
I hit myself, basically.
Yeah.
I hit myself with the ground.
You hit yourself. Okay. So yeah. So the ground won, Tyler nothing. So
unfortunately.
you said you wanted to be 100% by the time you got back from Colorado. So give us an update. How are you feeling?
I'd say training wise, it's 100%. The only time it still, I notice it or it gives me any issue is sleeping. Sleeping, it's still a little bit annoying. Just, like when I roll over, I'll wake up on that side and I'm like, gosh, that's really annoying. So it's like if I push on that side of my rib cage, I can tell that there's like less flexion in the ribs. So it's still definitely healing. But in terms of performance and exercise, it's been completely fine. Yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. So yeah, in that sense, I'd say mission accomplished in terms of really getting back and feeling just a lot better, having that injury be, not impacting my training at least. And, it's not to the point where I'm not able to sleep. It's just, every once in a while I wake up and maybe I'm rolling over a little bit more than usual.
So you're not 100% back in terms of full injury recovery, but you're 100% back in terms of your training ability.
Exactly. I'd say, yeah, the injury is not 100% healed, but I'd say it's 0% impacting my ability to train. And that's really what I wanted. I mean, obviously, if it's seriously impacting your life outside of training, that's a big deal, but I don't feel like it is. It's like a minor nuisance, if anything.
Okay. So you had a lot of fun with the airlines this week. As we all have from time to time, those of us who traveled in any extensive way. So you started out with flight problems and adding an extra day to your trip because of missed connections and such. So how do you adjust for that and deal with the logistics of trying to fit in your training while having your schedule go sideways?
I'd say there's kind of two sides to the coin. One is just the acceptance of this is the situation I'm in, and they'll Buddhist proverb of basically suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are. So the quicker that you can get to acceptance of the situation, the better it's going to go and the better you're going to feel about it. So that's a big part of it with me. Was I very quickly in this situation realized, okay, I'm not getting home today. I'm getting home tomorrow instead. And with that, just once you accept that, then things become a lot less stressful because you're not kind of fighting with the inevitable. The other thing that I try to do is take advantage of even small chunks of time to try and kind of sneak stuff in. So, this trip, for example, I was like, I had to rush around a little bit because things had changed. And so, it's like, okay, I have 1 hour. What can I get done in 1 hour? Okay, cool. I'll go, up this trail in Frisco. That's a really nice uphill trail right out of town. It's really close. I can get a really good workout in an hour. That's great. And then even the next day when I was still in Miami, it's like, okay, I'm at a hotel. It's got a treadmill. Miami is obviously pretty flat, very sea level. So, okay, I can work out on the treadmill and still get a really good workout in there in a couple of hours on the treadmill. It's not maybe the most fun thing for me to do, but I can salvage that and just be flexible. So I think the first step is acceptance, and then the second step is just being flexible and taking advantage of what opportunities are around you in terms of training and getting creative. I've literally done workouts like in stairwells of big buildings or in parking lots, like stuff like that. There's always time, there's always places to fit in your exercise, your training. And I think it's just kind of letting go of any expectation and just trying to get in whatever you can and having fun with it, being creative.
Uh-huh. That's good advice, I think. Yeah, I think a lot of us get stuck in, well, if I don't have the full time, then I just don't do anything at all. And
Exactly.
so taking those little snack bites or whatever you want to call them, especially when your schedule is disrupted by travel or other things, is a good response. And just accepting that that's the way it is, so you can kind of problem solve your way through your days. As you said, you don't have any control over it, so you just gotta get
Right.
on with it. Hmm.
And I
Okay.
will say, like, when I'm here, in my zone, and that's part of why I am so routine focused and I like that, is because I will be very controlling about what I do. And it's very meticulous and it's very well thought out. And I think I've just, I've traveled so much over the last 5 or 10 years that I've recognized those travel days, even when they go really well, you just kind of have to let that part go. And it's like, okay, whatever happens, happens. And sometimes that means literally jogging around the airport terminal. Sometimes it means you don't have time for anything because it's literally you're just in one place to the next, and just
Yep.
being able to be flexible. So I think it is, there's different places for that. And when you're traveling at 100%, it's that is the time to let go of all expectations about training and just whatever you can fit it in.
Yep. Hmm. Okay. All right. So speaking of travel, you mentioned in your training notes that your heart rate was 35 overnight at sea level in Miami. Again, for runners, I was a big tennis player when I was younger all the time, and my resting heart rate was 39 or something like that. So
Hmm.
it's still kind of shocking to a lot of people to say, "Wow, 35 heart rate, are you alive?"
Yeah.
Um, but even for you, that was pretty low, 35. So how does your body typically respond to these, significant changes in altitude over such short periods? I mean, you went from Quito to Colorado to Miami, which is sea level, right?
Yeah.
So what do you notice? How is your body affected by those changes in such short time frames?
I think resting heart rate is an interesting one because it's also really heavily impacted by how fatigued you are, or if you're sick or something like that. It could be a pretty noisy variable. So to me, when I see a
Uh-huh.
number like 35, it's actually a pretty good sign usually, because it means not only, okay, have I come down to sea level and my body is responding well to the higher percentage of oxygen in the air, but it also says, oh, like I like we talked about at the beginning, this is the day before I'm going home, and this is a good sign that I'm really ready to go on the training front. I think
Uh-huh.
one of the things looking back at the month of June is I never really saw those metrics that I would look for in terms of really having the body feel recovered and from a quantitative perspective, so looking at heart rate variability and resting heart rate and things like that, even when I was like with you guys in Massachusetts, it never got anywhere near that low. And to me, that was just a sign that, okay, there's some stuff going on here, on a physiological level, long-term adaptations and recovery that is not finished yet, because my body is working harder overnight, or else, yeah, my heart rate should be, 35 to 38 probably,
Uh-huh.
overnight at sea level. So I think that was a really, really good sign. I think usually, if I see anything with a 3 in front of it, that's pretty good. That means I'm pretty well recovered. So yeah, 35, 36 is really, really low. That's probably the lowest I've ever seen it, is 35, full of times. And then, yeah, it's usually a combination of both. Okay, you're responding well to the altitude. The body is really like in a good state in terms of recovery and balance there. And also just, yeah, you're pretty fit. Obviously, I mean, if you yourself had your heart rate at, below 40, from playing tennis and all this other stuff, part of that is just a reflection of fitness. Just means you're really fit, which
Right.
is good. It's a good place to be.
Right. Yeah. 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 I remember my doctors being completely flipped out when I would
Oh yeah.
come in and my pulse rate's
Do you
39. They're like, "Are you okay?
Yeah, you're
You
gonna
feel
like
something?"
you like set off an alarm usually if you dip below 40 on a lot of like
Yeah.
hospital pulse meter. And I've
Yeah.
had that. I think it happened when we were in Phoenix when I got Achilles surgery. They like put that thing on and it, like kept binging because I'm just calm, and like I hadn't trained that much in the last few weeks, so like my heart rate was really low. It's just like chilling.
Yep. Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah. Even now, I get questions because, of course, I'm much older now and I can't exercise as much. And even if I did, your heart rate just tends to rise. But my resting heart rate is still in the low 50s and my sleeping heart rate is in the 40s. And
Nice.
yeah, you have to worry more at my age that that's not a heart problem, that that's a fitness issue and not a
Yeah.
heart problem. But so far appears to be fitness and not heart. So
Excellent.
we'll try and stay fit.
Yep.
Okay,
Stay
so
fit.
yep. Uh, Tuesday's workout in Miami. You worked out on a treadmill in Miami because you were stuck in Miami there because of your missed connection. Um, Seemed like that was your first really high quality session since leaving keto when you had your injury and you were struggling a little bit. You did 15 times 3 at lactate threshold. So how do you approach that kind of workout, pacing that kind of workout, especially since you're also adjusting the altitude because you're at sea level?
I mean, really, that was probably the first really solid workout I've had since like leaving Nepal. I think, June was really a rough month, I'd say, in terms of just how I was feeling physically. And I had a couple okay sessions, but really it was a stretch. This was probably the first time where I actually felt pretty good, which was it was really nice. Yeah, I mean, the altitude stuff is interesting because altitude affects heart rate in all kinds of interesting ways. So really with this one, I went into it as just, okay, I didn't really know what to look for in terms of pacing. Like 3 minutes at LT is pretty mellow. Doing it 15 times is not nothing, but it's not like a humongous workout. So really it was just like one of these where I just kind of like picked a kind of arbitrary number to start with. And treadmill to me can be a really, really helpful tool. And I know we'll talk about this in the cool down more later, but I think especially when you are getting back into your fitness and you don't really know where you are, it can be a helpful tool because you can kind of purposefully set it a little bit on the easy side to start and then like work your way into the workout by moving the speed up throughout, say the first quarter or third of the workout until you kind of find that sweet spot where, okay, my heart rate's in the right zone and it feels just about right in terms of difficulty, perceived exertion. So that's kind of what I did. I kind of just eased into the workout and then held it there in the middle for a while. And then, had a few reps at the end where I let myself run a little bit quicker. But yeah, I really enjoy the treadmill for that kind of thing. Because it's, I think sometimes if you just go out the door, especially for me on a trail like Polichosky, where, as we've talked about many times, like I have so many benchmarks, like every single rock and tree on that trail I know, and like I know how fast I should be. And so it's really easy to get, like tied into, oh, I'm having a bad workout because I'm going slower than I usually do, even though, if it's your first workout of the season, that's totally expected, but it can still be hard to separate that sometimes mentally. So I think, yeah, it's like this situation, especially, it's like, okay, I'm at sea level. I'm in a random gym at some hotel in Miami. It's pretty warm in here because it's Miami. And, I just didn't really have any expectations. So you really are able to just kind of go by feel. And then once you kind of find that zone, just like keep it right there, and have the machine kind of like do the work for you in terms of the pacing, which can be really, really helpful. So, it went really well. I was really pleased with it. And yeah, I think, it's one of those instances where the treadmill could be a really helpful tool, because otherwise I would have been running, outside on like the, really busy streets around the airport where it's like 100 degrees and flat, and that wouldn't have been that fun.
Yeah. 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 It's a very industrial neighborhood. I've stayed in some of those
Yeah.
hotels on occasion when I've flown through Miami. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So let's keep comparing that Miami workout because it was an interesting one. So the Miami sea level workout, then you talked either the day or a couple days later about you did a nearly identical session in keto. And of course that's, sea level versus 10,000 feet, give or take, right? In keto.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so what did you learn from running essentially the same workout at such different altitudes just a couple of days apart?
It was interesting. I kind of wanted to do it just out of curiosity, because looking at the splits afterwards, that the paces that I was hitting in Miami, I was like, oh, and then comparing that to kind of some of my previous early season workouts that I'd done in keto, I was like, oh, okay, this is actually pretty similar. So then I was like, I wonder how much different that will be. And so yeah, it was honestly kind of just for the sake of fun and science. I did like literally almost the exact same workout, like paced it almost exactly the same, on the treadmill. It's all uphill stuff. And yeah, obviously the big difference is you're doing it at almost 10,000 feet as opposed to sea level. And in theory, that should make a really big difference. And in practice, what I found was almost no difference. It was almost exactly the same. The heart rate was almost exactly the same. The perceived effort was almost exactly the same. Basically, the whole workout, basically, yeah, it really was, blow for blow, pretty much the same exact thing. And I think that's just a couple things. One way you could put it is, okay, like I'm really, really well altitude adapted, and therefore exercising at this intensity, oxygen is not the limiting factor. And so you're not running into oxygen limits. And that kind of explains it, like from a very, very layman's, kind of bro science perspective of just, if you're really well altitude adapted and you're not running into oxygen consumption limits, then it kind of makes sense that you should be able to do basically the same thing at the same effort, down low versus up high. I have seen that before on like very easy runs, like recovery runs. I've never seen it at something of this intensity. But I think that's probably part of it. And then I think the other thing is just kind of like we were saying with resting heart rate. I think sometimes the workout itself can also be a reflection of just how fatigued you are in general. And I think when I was in Miami, it had been a really busy week. I was really tired. I've been moving around a lot. I had like 7 hotels in 7 days. And like, I probably was just more tired going into that workout. And I was a little bit fresher. And when I got up to keto and had a few good nights sleep and was in my own bed and, was able to recover well those few days. So I think those extra days, like the extra recovery and freshness, essentially made up for the difference in altitude is kind of how I interpret it. So I think there's those two sides of the coin. One, you could argue, is just, okay, for me, there's probably not that big a difference between sea level and high altitude, or, what I would consider medium altitude here. Not big mountaineering altitude, but, 10,000 feet and below, it just doesn't make that much of a difference at these kind of paces. Or the other one is just, yeah, you're probably just really tired in Miami. And so it was actually probably slower than it could have been if you were really fresh and well rested for that one.
Yeah, that makes some sense, I guess. I'm reminded that I think it was just last week we talked about the fact that you ran typically between 216 and 220 marathons at sea level, and your record at the Leadville Marathon is almost over an hour slower.
Yeah, that's not that's
1,000
not a
feet
very
up,
good point
right?
of comparison though with altitude, because with altitude, the altitude only makes a little bit of that difference. It's mostly because it has a tremendous amount of climbing. Some of it's really, really steep.
I see, that's right. We
I
did
think I ran
talk
a
about that.
marathon
Different
here.
kind
I've
of
run marathons
run.
here in keto in, I think, around 230 or maybe 225. So 5 or 10
Really?
minutes, I think,
Okay.
is more realistic. Yeah, in terms
Okay.
of the altitude difference. But
Okay.
yeah, Leadville's That's a different beast. It's more
Okay.
this is why they call it, they think they get to call it a trail race because it's all, it's hilly, it's in the mountains, but it's a very, very hilly road race. It's more like, I don't know if you remember that, the one time I did that at the US 50-mile championships, which were in State College, PA, and
Yep,
it's a similar
I
thing
do.
to that, where it's a lot of just up and down and up and down on these big hills,
Yep.
and it's dirt roads, and so it's more like that. And then comparing that to running on a pancake flat course like a Berlin Marathon or something like that.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So, but still a pretty good indication. I don't think most people would probably be able to do the same exercise. So a good indication of your fitness, it sounds like.
Yeah, but it is interesting because I think it's almost like the two ends of the spectrum. So the 100-meter dash and even the 200-meter dash, and I think even up to the 400, are actually positively impacted by altitude. So you can run much faster at 100 meters in keto than you could
Really?
in Miami. Yeah, because the air is so thin. There's less air
There is
resistance.
thinner air?
And
Hmm.
it's a completely anaerobic activity. You don't, you could literally hold your
Oh, right.
breath
Right.
for
Right.
the entire time that you're racing 100 meters. So those guys, oxygen is 0%, drag is really important, and so it flips. So altitude is actually helpful. So you see, this is why in Mexico City in the what was it, 1972,
68?
68 maybe, it was somewhere
I think it
around there in
was,
the
yeah.
Mexico City Olympics. You had all these world records in the long jump, the throws, I think in the sprints
Yep.
too, because you had this drag that was removed, the air resistance that was removed. So that was huge. So on that side, yeah, on the sprints, you have better performance at altitude. And then on the other side, if you look at a well-adapted runner, for example, just coming here to like train for track and field, if they go out and they do their easy recovery runs, say at 7-minute miles in Boston, and then they come up here and they are decently well adapted, they should be able to be running about 7-minute mile pace. It should be about the same. And that's the reason that I was talking about, which is oxygen uptake is not the problem. It's not a limiting factor there. You're never pushing into a
Uh-huh.
zone where you're really having to push the limits of your own body to process oxygen. And so there's actually plenty of oxygen still in the air up here in keto for that person to be able to run 7-minute pace, because you're running at, I don't know, like 50% of VO2 max or something. So it just doesn't impact you. So it's really that middle zone of like, from kind of lactate threshold up to VO2 max and above. That's where it really, really impacts it pretty strongly. And the closer you get to maximum oxygen processing, the more it's going to be impacted. So the most impacted events are going to be, everything from like 1 mile to like 10K half marathon probably, and then it kind of diminishes after that.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Okay. Thanks. So,
Sure.
all right. So let's talk about, I was interested in talking about Friday because on Friday you worked out entirely indoors inside the gym. You said you wanted more control and comparison to your earlier workouts. So why? What's the value of those controlled sessions versus the outdoor training?
Part of it, honestly, was just I kind of needed a confidence booster, and I felt like, again, we've talked about this before. I just said it, but going back to Polichowski, I've run so well on that route, and I know exactly what every stick means, that I was like, I wasn't confident enough to go out there and be like, okay, I'm going to try something, and even if I run 59 minutes, it's going to be okay. I would rather have, just do something in the gym where it's super controlled. I can do something that's a little bit different, so I don't have the perfect benchmarks from previous seasons, but I'm going to get a really, really good workout, and then I'll feel like that's a good confidence boost, and then I can go, back to Polichowski next week. And it was honestly it. It was mostly just kind of feeling almost insecure about being, at the start of the buildup and not quite as far ahead as I wanted to be. And I just really wanted to have a good session. And I knew that if I went to the gym, I would be able to control it and keep my effort lined up in such a way that I would have a good session. And that was the most important thing for me at the end of the day, was walking away feeling like, okay, I feel really good about that. I feel like I got a really good workout, and I feel confident and strong and ready to like actually go back out into the mountains. So that was honestly it for me. I mean, sometimes it is more about actually controlling for various factors, but this was really, I'd say it was mostly just me being a little bit of a head case in this example, and just really wanting to, it was more about just, I need to have a good workout. And June had been so just not feeling great in training, and I really just wanted to go have some good training days. And yeah, so far that went really well. The workouts went really well on Friday. The weekend's gone really well, and now yeah, tomorrow will be Monday, and I'll head back out to Polichaski for kind of the first real push up that, and I'm feeling a lot better about it.
Okay. Well, that's perfectly reasonable, it seems to me, because you're self-aware at least, and there's nothing
Yeah,
wrong with that. Sometimes you do, it's like we used to joke a long time ago that even master chefs will, chop onions and make mayonnaise, simple things once in a while. And
exactly. Yep.
part of it is just giving yourself something you can do to get to, keep your confidence high. And part of it is also just keeping your basic skills in place as well. So, but a lot of
Exactly.
it is about confidence. It's just about, okay,
Yep.
yeah, every once in a while you need to recognize that we're all human and we all have our insecurities. It's, to the average runner, I'm sure it's hard to believe you're ever insecure. They're probably like, how can he be insecure so much faster than all the rest of us put together? But when you're, you're always comparing yourself to yourself. So it's all relative, right? There's always somebody faster. You're always feeling like you're not quite as good as you could be.
Yeah.
So it's understandable. Okay.
Yeah. And again, it
And
goes
then,
back to this idea of benchmarks and why they can be so helpful and also can be really hard sometimes is, you have very concrete data. I do, at least from, many years of training here in keto. And I know exactly, where I was in January at the beginning of the last build up, or in, August of last year, or in June of last year, and, or, years before, and even in my recovery from surgery. And, I have data going back 15 years plus now in keto. So I have all these points of comparison, and the truth is it's somewhat apples to apples, but it's also, it can be tricky to compare season to season because you're never quite the same in terms of, how you come off of each season. Sometimes, for example, I think back to January and it's like, okay, well, January, I was coming off this really abbreviated kind of like little coda season where I went to Aconcagua and had a nice, mostly guiding there in the Chilean side, and then went to Aconcagua and got the short record there, which was really hard, but it's like, it's a 4 hour record or something. It's not that demanding on the body and from a recovery perspective. And then I took like 2 weeks of kind of hanging out with you guys in the holidays, and went to Chile with a friend. So I had a really pretty chill 6 weeks leading into the beginning of that build up in January. And then if I compare that to like the 6 weeks of basically May and early June, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a very different that's a very, very
yeah,
different 6 weeks. I put my
yeah,
body through way more. I was in way harsher environments. And so some of this is always just, it's much easier to look at, like, zoom out and look at things as a third party sometimes, as opposed to just being in the moment and looking at it yourself. And I think I really struggled with that in June, where I was like, why aren't I fitter? Like, why aren't I more ready to go? Why isn't my body recovered? And then I would zoom out and be like, okay, if my athlete that I was coaching came to me and told me that this had been their last, 4 months or 4 weeks, let alone like the last 6 months leading up to that, I'd be like, yeah, you're probably pretty cooked. That makes
pretty
sense.
cooked.
Like, you're
Yeah,
going to need some time. Um, and I think that's, for me, that's really been the story of the last month, is just this internal battle of wanting it to be different and wanting to be fitter, and also recognizing, dude, like, you just need to relax and be patient. It's that idea we were talking about at the beginning of the episode with Buddhism of, once you accept that things are not the way that you want them to be, then the happier you're going to be, because the problem isn't actually that you feel bad. The problem is that you don't feel as good as you want to be. You don't feel as good
yeah,
as you think you should feel in this moment. And that was, I think, really
yeah,
my biggest issue back in June. Yeah.
yeah. Well, one more inner game quote from Tim Galway, because he did a lot of meditation training. I think he even went to India and studied with, uh, people there. But he had a great saying. I remember for tennis, he would say, and it's a very Buddhist kind of saying, the ball is never where it should be, but always where it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can sort of apply that. I apply that to
I
most
think he applied
situations in
that to
life.
tennis. I think that's a pretty common phrase. I've definitely heard something like that before, just in terms of life. So, but
Yeah.
it's a good
Yeah,
one. Yep.
exactly. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So the afternoon session that day, you did a
Yeah.
pretty intense CD session with 15 by 45 seconds, running a lot faster. So how does it feel to be running at these higher speeds again in this transition period after the transition?
The overall intensity I'd say wasn't actually that hard. It was a more intense energy system in terms of I wanted to run quicker and just work on the mechanics of running faster again. I haven't done much of that in the last 3 months certainly, and I think this was just kind of a nice introductory workout there. The volume was low, the rest was ample, so it mostly just felt okay. I'm doing something that feels a little bit foreign, but John Waldron has this saying oftentimes in training that, the dose makes the medicine. And I think with faster running, especially unless you're training for a really, really fast race, like, a short track race, a little goes a long way. And that's been my experience is these little tiny doses, especially early in the season, can really get you ready to just feel better running after not running a lot. And again, when I was on Everest, we were not actually running hardly at all. So there's definitely some delay and just getting used to that and comfortable with that movement again and cadence and turnover and popping off the ground and all these things that we do when we run that we don't do when we're just power hiking up and down really big mountains. but uh
Yep.
but
Yeah.
it's also like riding a bike, and I think that the neuromuscular connections, those come back a lot quicker than say the overall aerobic fitness or strength or things like that can take quite a bit longer usually. If you've have 10 or 20 years of running in your legs, which I do at this point, then that stuff, it comes back pretty fast, which is really nice to see. So I think this was, like I said about the workout in general, it was kind of exactly what I wanted, and that it was fun. It went well. I feel good after it. And I think I'm going to get a very nice little just kind of bump stimulus going forward. And that should make everything else, hopefully continue to move up into the right.
Okay. Sounds good. So the other thing on the exercise front I was really interested in is you're always cross training in various ways. So you talked on Friday, you added both a strength and a plyometrics session in addition to the two running workouts. So how do you think about
Mhm.
integrating these cross training strength workouts as you ramp back up? And are you doing anything differently from the last season in the spring?
So I actually talked to Ryan Hall about this quite a bit last week when I was with him, because he's really into strength and lifting and all this stuff. And he was both as an athlete, or as an athlete, he's obviously still an athlete, both as a professional marathon runner back in his day, as well as now as someone who is unbelievably fit, but isn't a competitive marathon runner anymore. And picked his brain a little bit. I think that in terms of doing things differently, I would say there are a handful of things that we talked about that I'm trying to implement. So one of those is basically thinking about on those really, really long days, like what felt the most sore, like what was the hardest thing. That's a really easy way to kind of diagnose. And for me, it was my back felt sore and tired. And I think part of that is my packs that I was carrying were a little bit heavier than I trained with. So that's one thing where I want to basically just start carrying a heavier pack, especially on my easier days. And kind of ease into that over the next couple of months, but definitely work up to, doing some days where I'm maybe carrying 20 or 30 pounds up Polychowski or something, just to get used to that. I think that's more of like functional strength, and just doing it out on the day is going to be really helpful.
Uh-huh.
The other thing was my lower legs, ankles, Achilles, on both sides. So, it's not the same kind of Achilles stuff I was having before surgery, but, especially on the steeper parts of Everest, where like on the Lhotse face, for example, which is from basically camp 2 to camp 4, it's pretty steep. It's I'd say anywhere from like 40 to 60 degrees, and it's not stairs, so you're stepping onto an angle, and when you do that, you're really, really engaging your Achilles tendon and your lower legs and all the muscles in there. And that was one where Ryan actually gave me a whole bunch of exercises. There's this really weird little contraption. It's hard to describe, and I don't have it with me here yet because I ordered it. But you basically like strap it onto the bottom of your foot, and then you can weight it, like put a plate or a dumbbell like effectively onto the bottom of your foot. And what that allows you to do is, like, let's say you're lying on a massage table or on a table or a couch. If your foot is dangling off, the weight will kind of pull your foot in a certain direction. It's basically, it's similar to a band, but you can weight it with a little bit more, and it's a little bit more gravity focused. And then you can really work different angles of the muscles around the ankle. So everything from like calf and soleus and shin to like your post tib and like all the weird little tendons in there. Because I found that was something that really just was not that fun when I was going up a couple times, was those few hours on the laissez face of just, you're basically just like on tiptoes, like going up a really steep hill the whole time, and that just gets really old. It's a very repetitive motion, and it's kind of similar to Polychowski, but even on Polychowski, the difference between 30% grade on grass, which is what we have there at the steepest, is maybe 30 or 35%, versus being on snow and crampons, where you really only have 2 points of contact with the snow, which is your front points. You just have so much more force on the Achilles tendon there, and then you add weight to the pack, and that's even more. So those are the two really big things I want to focus on, that I'd say are different than in the spring, are the weighted pack carries and some extra work, just kind of making those ankles and lower legs super bulletproof. That's the idea. And so, yeah, the strength and plyo stuff, that's a little bit of just kind of general maintenance, I would say. The stuff that I was doing on Friday at the gym, that's pretty similar to what I was doing in the spring. And a lot of that stuff is honestly left over from my Achilles rehab. It's just stuff that I found was really helpful, and it's functional strength for running and moving uphill. And especially the plyometric stuff, I think, is really, really good for Achilles tendon, just general strength and mobility. So I try to do that at least once or twice a week. And yeah, now it's just, finding more time in the day to add more and more stuff. But, training this, I think I've
Yep.
probably said it before on this podcast, which is, an old John Waldron quote, is something along the lines of, training is more about what you're not doing, what you choose not to do, than what you actually choose to do, because there's always going to be more training and things that you could do than you're going to have time for. So it's about how do you prioritize those things. And, I'm extremely privileged in that this is my full-time job. And so I do have plenty of hours in my day, and, I can add an extra couple hours a week to do some ankle work and stuff like that. But it's always an interesting conundrum of, okay, yeah, if you're going to add here and subtract here, and like, what do you do and prioritize? And I think that's an interesting part of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I might have a conversation with you, and there may be other people interested too, because I have a little Achilles soreness here and there, and I think a lot of people do by the time they reach middle age. If you're a runner or any kind of athlete that does any kind of stressful foot sport, which is most sports, put some
Yeah.
level of stress on your feet, you end up with some Achilles problems at some point. Okay, great. So Saturday's Polychowski run seemed almost literally identical to Thursday's. So you're both 77 minutes long. So what does that tell you about where you are in starting this buildup?
I don't think I'm any fitter than I was a couple of weeks ago, but at the same effort a couple of weeks ago, I was going up in 80 or even 85 minutes at the same effort level and the same heart rate. To me, it just goes back to not being recovered in mid-June. I think that's really it. Maybe I'm a little bit fitter, but realistically, you're not going to get 5 or 10 minutes quicker in 2 weeks. That doesn't happen. But what does happen is, yeah, if you're super, super exhausted on a kind of macro physiological level, if you don't let that recovery happen, then you're going to kind of plateau. And sometimes if you do, it's almost counterintuitive, where if you take a step back from training, you let your body recover really well, then all of a sudden you can make these kind of big jumps. And it's not even really that you're making a jump, it's almost more that you're correcting to where you should be. And that's kind of how I see it. So I think part of, again, it's like this whole negative cycle, because back then, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think I was like pushing harder, because like, oh no, I need to train harder so that you can get faster, which is like such a rookie mistake. And I know it, like, intellectually, I understand that. But in the moment, you're like, oh no, I'm just not that fit. I must have lost all this fitness and blah, blah, blah. And so you go out and you try and train harder, when really what your body is saying is, hey man, I'm just too cooked and you need to take a step back. And so I think even just, that trip to the States was, yeah, it was a it was a whirlwind, but also at the same time, it wasn't that much hard training. It wasn't that much running. And so I did come back just feeling a lot better. And so, yeah, those, 80 to 85 minutes becoming, 77 minutes is, for me, that's a really good sign. I mean, I think if I'm, it's like such a small distinction maybe, but for me, being in the mid 70s, I think is really, really good for my easy days up there. And now the question is, okay, do those 77s become 75s and 74s and 72s, or, do they become 80s and 84s? That's kind of the important part. But for right now, I feel, really good about where we are. And I think next week will be even better because I'll have a couple of actual quicker runs up Polichowski, and that's another really good point of just kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah. So it's really a matter of sort of removing obstacles rather than adding things. So,
Yeah,
your recovery is an obstacle to your performance, and sort of just
exactly.
getting over that, removing that obstacle improves your fitness, even though literally the normal way we think of improving fitness wasn't at play here, it sounds like. It
Right,
wasn't
because
like you
again,
got
I don't think you're
faster,
gonna
your heart rate
have,
got better.
yeah, I don't think you're gonna see those kind of improvements in terms of actual fitness gains. I think that what you're seeing is just a different level of readiness to go out and do the thing. There's, again,
Yeah.
I've quoted John Waldron like 5 times today, but there's another. He talks about basically, when you're sick or you're injured or you're overtrained, you can be as fit as you want, but you can't access that fitness, and that's what it feels like in that
Hmm.
moment. It's or
Exactly.
maybe like looking back, it's okay. I know I'm fit. I know I can do this, but I just can't get at it. It's like stuck somewhere. It's locked up. And the only way,
Yeah.
counterintuitively, to get at that fitness is to just chill and like let your body recover and relax and just go on and move on. And, you know,
Yeah.
then a week passes and all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, there it is. I'm still fit. It's
Yeah.
okay. The world's not over.
Another life lesson, because that's true almost across the board. At least I think about it like, if you want to play most sports, you play them the best when you're the most relaxed. You're not totally relaxed. People think, oh, they're so relaxed. Well, no, a baseball
No.
player hits a home run. It's not relaxed when he's hitting the ball,
Unbelievably
but he's as
focused. Yeah.
relaxed as he can be, because the whip, the faster he swings, the further the ball goes. And you swing faster when you're more relaxed. Same with golf, same with tennis, same with most sports. You run faster if you're the
Yep.
most relaxed you could be. You're not relaxed. You're still making a lot of effort, but you're not
Yep.
over constraining yourself. And you could say the same thing about writer's block. It's the same kind of thing. If you may be a great writer, make the analogy, but if you can't access that ability, if you can't get at it because something's in the way, it's blocking you, you've got this obstacle. In this case, we're talking about a semi-physical obstacle, but there's an emotional and mental part to it as well, because as you said, you were kind of trying to force fit it,
Right.
rather than just. But what you have to do is say, no, no, no. I need to be able to relax as much as possible to get at this, and if I need to
Yep.
rest some more, that's what I need to do. Hmm. Okay.
Exactly.
Um, so now if you reflect on the week as a whole, then this seemed to be a much better week. It seemed like you sort of got
Yeah.
back in your rhythm. June was a kind of a slog, a bit of a struggle. So what really clicked for you? Was there anything in particular that you noticed? And how did it feel once you got back to keto, to get back into your, as I call it, your monastery monk routine?
I think it was honestly just the kind of letting go. That was a really big part of it. Was I distinctly remember that the workout that I had, like the day that I left for Colorado, so like a week and a half ago, that morning didn't go well. And we talked about it last week. And instead of trying to go out and force it and do something else that afternoon, I was like, you know what? Okay, this is the line in the sand for me. I can't even do a like really straightforward workout that should be an easy layup. This is not a fitness issue. This is like something else going on. Once I made that exception, and it was just, okay, I'm just gonna have fun with running. I'm going to go on this trip. It's going to be crazy anyways. I'm just going to kind of get in some easy runs here and there with friends when I can. It's going to be fun. It's going to be social. It's going to be beautiful weather. I think that just physically and mentally gave me this permission to just have this hard reset there. And then coming back to keto, I just felt like that was exactly what the doctor ordered. I had a couple easy days here. I had that good day in the gym. I've had a couple more really nice days. Like the sun's out, the mountains are all clear now. It's just, everything just seems to be kind of clicking in. And, I am definitely the kind of like up in my monastery here by myself and doing my monk thing and getting into my routine. And that's really helpful too. But I don't think that would have happened, or at least I wouldn't have been as ready for it if I hadn't just really had that big attitudinal shift of, okay, I'm just not going to stress out about it, right? I just need to take a step back, let my body do what it's going to do, and just be patient with it. And, if I had done that in or like 2 or 3 weeks earlier, it probably would have been a lot better. But sometimes, even for me, having done this many, many, many times, I still fall into the same traps. And, I probably will again, just because it's really hard. And it's really hard to separate, where you want things to be going from where they are. Like your Buddhist analogy about the ball is where it is. Like, it's exactly the same. Your fitness is always exactly where it is, and it's never exactly where you want it to be or you think it should be. It just is where it is. And you just have to work with
Yep.
that. And so, yeah, I think honestly, it was just a really big attitudinal shift. And now being here I just really, really like my life here. And I'm excited to be getting ready to go now and feeling good about it.
Okay. All right. So last question that I have for this week. So UTMB is coming up less than 2 months away. What are you
Yep.
most looking forward to now as you start building up towards that?
I think just running more is something I'm really excited about. It's been a long 4 or 5 month build up into Everest, and of a lot of just kind of hiking and power hiking and climbing, which I like. But I come from a running background, and so that's what I like to do. I love running. So doing some more
Uh-huh.
running is definitely
Uh-huh.
exciting. And yeah, I think just like feeling good in the process of training and seeing progress from week to week. That's why I fell in love with running when I was 17 years old. And that's still for me, such a powerful experience, is that idea of, okay, here I am this week and I'm going to do a workout in 4 weeks that I know I can't do right now. And that's a really cool concept. It's just that you go and you train harder, and then you can do things that you couldn't do before. And that's honestly just really, really exciting. And, obviously UTMB is a really big race. It's something I've been a part of as a like spectator and supporter and crew member for the last few years. And it'll be exciting to finally get to toe the line with, some of the best in the world. So I'm a definitely a competitive person, and that's something that is really exciting to me. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to both the preparation, the monk style stuff here, being by myself and just doing my own thing every day, and then also, yeah, actually getting to go out and race.
Okay, great. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's a good recap of the week. So we'll cut and come back for our cool down.
Okay, and we're back. The today's cool down, we're going to talk about controlled versus natural training environments. And we had a little bit of discussion about that during the session, but let's dig deeper into it. So you made a deliberate choice to do Friday's entire double workout session inside the gym for comparison and control. And as we discussed, to a certain extent, for emotional support, if you will, to make sure you had a good workout, rather than your usual, running up to the Polochowski. What specifically were you hoping to learn or gain from that controlled environment that you wouldn't get from the outdoor training?
So there's this trope, I think, especially in running, where it's almost like an elitist thing that I think people kind of look down upon the treadmill. And I think it's a really, really helpful and useful tool at times. It definitely has its place. And I don't think you can train for like a trail race just training on treadmill, or even for a road marathon or something like that. But I do think it can be a really helpful tool. And I think it's got kind of a bad rap. In this particular case, like we talked about in the main part of the episode, part of it was I just wanted to have a good workout, and it felt like that was easier to control. It felt like it would be easier to control my pace, not get as focused on, all the splits outside. There's fewer things involved. And, one of the really big things about the treadmill that doesn't get talked about and is different even from like an elliptical or a stationary bike is, the treadmill sets the pace for you. And that is a really, really hard part of running that I think especially if you're not a runner, might not be as obvious, is it can be really hard to set the right pace. Sometimes that means you're going out too fast, too aggressively, but it feels too easy. Sometimes it means, when things get hard, if you're a little bit mentally fatigued, it's harder to maintain that pace and you slow down. The treadmill is different because you press the button and it says, I want to run whatever it is, 12 miles per hour, 5-minute mile pace, say, and then it just stays there. And you actively have to do something. You have to press the button and change it and stop it or step off or something, versus when you're outside, that slowing down will happen naturally. So I find that, especially, and this is like such a complete bro science, like science-based take, is especially early in the season, I think that sometimes you can almost like forget how to run really hard, and you can forget how to pace yourself and forget how to push through when things get hard. And you can doubt, like, oh, if this feels hard 10% into the workout, then it's going to be too hard later. And then you have this whole central governor reaction and you start slowing down. Again, whether that's conscious or subconscious doesn't matter, but it happens. If you're on the treadmill, you can't do that because, again, you have to press the button. So if you set it at your pace for that workout, and it's, say you're doing 1-minute reps or something, unless you change it, it's going to be the same. And so it almost forces you to adapt to that increasing discomfort and mental stimulus that we get really used to when we do this every single week or multiple times a week for a couple months, which is what we do in the build up for a big event. But if you haven't done that in a while, it can be really hard to remember, oh my gosh, this second rep feels terrible and I have 18 more to go. How am I possibly going to do this? But realistically, it's like, okay, yeah, you can do that. It's fine. You just kind of forgot what that feels like. So for me personally, I've seen that all the time, where it's, early in the season, like I am now, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's what it's like to run hard. Early in the workout, I'll be like, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to be able to finish this. And really what happens is actually I'm able to maintain it and then even get quicker at the end. And you just basically forget what you're capable of. So I think that's a really big part of working out on machines sometimes is it can be a really big mental boost of just, oh yeah, that level of discomfort where I thought I was at 90%, actually I was only at like 70% because I had way more left in the tank at the end than I thought I did. And I think that you can get that in a race or a hard workout outside. But especially if you're working out by yourself, it's just way, way harder.
Yep. I think people radically underestimate how hard it is to maintain tempo, even with a watch and other assistants. It's like music. It's just not trivial to maintain tempo. It takes a lot more out of you than you realize. So having an external device, as you say, force you to maintain a certain tempo, I think is a big help. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. So when you're comparing workouts, so you did, especially this week we talked about already the Miami versus the keto workouts that were nearly identical on the treadmill. How valuable is that? How good is it that you have that very controlled, precise comparison than you might get if you were in a more variable environment like running outdoors on Polachowski or some other outdoor terrain?
I think it's much more helpful in one individual workout. So for example, if you want to start out a little bit easier and then kind of work into it, hold the pace for a while, and then maybe close a little bit faster, you can have that really nice kind of up and to the right gentle curve of intensity as the workout goes on. I think that part is really, really helpful. It's way easier to do that well on a treadmill than it is, say, if you go to the local track or on a hill or a road or something like that. Again, because the treadmill is, you're just doing it. Like, it's doing all the work for you in terms of pacing. And also, I guess I should say, if you are working out with a group or if you have someone pacing you on a bike, that is another really, really good way to do that. Most of us don't have that. And so if you're out there by yourself, that makes it a lot harder. I think from workout to workout, it can actually be harder, if anything, to correlate data sometimes. I mean, the example here is a pretty good one because you would think that I would see really different results between, training in keto at 10,000 feet and training in Miami at sea level. In reality, we saw almost exactly the same thing, which doesn't make a lot of sense. We kind of tried to talk about it a little bit on the main episode, but realistically, there's probably other stuff going on there. And so gym workouts, again, they can be very controlled, and it's easy usually to compare one session to itself, like across that session. But from session to session, things like how warm is it in there? Like, is the machine calibrated right? I don't know. I was at some random days in the Miami airport. Who knows? Maybe it was off by 2%. And that's a huge amount, when we're so precise with how we measure things and compare things. So, little things like that where, oh, maybe this, like this treadmill is just a little bit different. It's a little bit off calibrated. The room was warmer. This one had a breeze blowing through. This one had a fan. This one didn't. I was wearing these shoes versus that shoe. There's a lot of different things. And some of that is relevant to the outdoor world as well. But I think especially, the specifics of the machine and the specifics of the room, unless you're working out on the same machine in the same gym, I tend to be a little bit wary of comparing workouts, across the world, across different gyms and stuff like that. You can kind of get a ballpark sense, but not in the same way as if you literally just go out and run the exact same trail from point A to point B and you're using, hard landmarks that don't actually move. I think that's a better point of comparison. I think treadmill is much better for saying, okay, I finished this workout faster than I started it, but if I did the same workout in 2 weeks on a different treadmill in a different gym, is that apples to apples? Not exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's really within a workout, as you said, that it makes the most difference, and
Yeah.
the ability to control precisely how much you're forcing yourself to do at any
Yep.
given moment.
Yep.
Okay. There is a tension, and I think you may have mentioned this a little earlier. There's a tension in endurance sports in particular, but most running sports, that between the precision of the indoor training, you were talking about treadmills getting a bad rep, exact paces, controlled conditions, perfect data, versus the experience and variability of running outdoors and having the hills and having the uneven terrains and things that you actually have to deal with. So how do you think about that trade-off, especially when you're preparing for something as highly variable and unpredictable as the race at UTMB?
Like almost everything in life, I think there's a lot of pros and a lot of cons to both things. Training in a gym, training on a treadmill, there's a lot of positive things about that. I think if you go to the extreme and you only did that, for what it's worth, I do know people who do that. My brother is an example. Like I never have run outside with him in my entire life. But he runs, I don't know, probably a few times a week on a treadmill. Oh, that's true. That's true. That's true. We did go to the Great Canyon. I forgot about that. Yeah. And he almost croaked.
Yep.
No, but really, there are some people who that's their thing. They want to, listen to their music or watch a show. They don't like the idea of going out and finding running routes, whatever it is. It's just they're to each their own. And for me personally, I see the treadmill more as a tool in my arsenal than, the reason that I don't train so that I can go to the gym and run on the treadmill. Like I run on the treadmill so that I can go do cool stuff outside, like it's the other way around. And
Yep.
I think most people probably see it like that. I do think that especially for, trail races and even again for marathon races, running on asphalt and concrete is a lot harder of a surface to run on. Literally, it's literally harder. It's more impact than running on a somewhat bouncy treadmill belt. So I think if you don't do that, if you don't go out and run on asphalt or concrete or whatever it is that you're running on, at least partly in your build up for a marathon, you're probably not going to have a great time because your legs are not going to be ready for that much impact trauma. And in the same way, trail running presents all kinds of interesting stuff. We go up, we go down, we have very uneven terrain, we have rocks, we have some loose stuff, we have plants that we have to jump over. So it's a completely different sport from the way that your foot impacts the ground is almost nothing like running on a treadmill. So to me, treadmills, it's almost more like cross training for what I do, at least in terms of trail and mountain stuff. It's something where I know that it's going to get my engine really, really dialed, but then I also go out into the mountains every single day because that's what's going to get my mechanics really dialed. So, you might have heard the analogy before with runners that you have the engine and the chassis of the car, right? And the chassis is your kind of neuromuscular or excuse me, your musculoskeletal system, and how that interacts with the ground, and the motor, the engine, is your cardiovascular system. And sometimes you're training both of those, sometimes you're training one, sometimes you're training the other. For me, treadmill is really all about developing the engine. It's about making your engine bigger and more efficient. Outside is more about all that stuff. It's encompassing some engine training, but it's really more about training the chassis and getting that really dialed in, getting the suspension, so to speak, to continue our analogy, getting the the suspension, dialed really well for whatever terrain it is that you're moving on, all those things that are actually more like the competition that you're actually going to be on. And again, same thing for road racing. If you're training for Boston Marathon, for example, like you better be out running some hills in January, February, March, on pavement, because otherwise, you're going to get to the Newton Hills and you're going to have a really hard time and it's not going to go well. So you can train a lot on treadmill. I actually think a guy, Brett Van Dorn, I don't know if he listens to this podcast, but he's a guy I've coached and he's helped with some Chosky projects. He trains a lot on the treadmill, especially in the winter. And he's had some great runs at Boston. So there are obviously exceptions to this rule, but I think personally for me, it really feels more like a tool that I just use to help myself get really, really fit. Unless I were training specifically for a treadmill race or something, which we'd have that one way back in the day. Unless I were doing something like that,
Yep.
the treadmill it's always just going to be a tool for developing the engine. And even like we talked about just a second ago, that idea of, kind of mental callousing to certain levels of discomfort, I think it can be really helpful for that. But really, if you want to run UTMB, if you want to run up and down Everest, if you want to run the Boston Marathon, whatever you're doing, you better be training on some kind of terrain that's pretty similar to that.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I will add, and certainly from my own personal experience, there are two other factors for mere mortals and amateurs. One is injury. And
Sure. Yep.
so
That's a really good point.
I I ran up until about 10 years ago, maybe a little less than 10 years ago, and I can't do it. My knees are too beaten up. And as you know, I had a serious trauma to my left knee. And it's okay. I can still play tennis. I can walk. But running is painful,
Yeah.
instantaneously painful. I can get on the elliptical of any type, a low impact environment, rowing, things like that I can do. So if I want to keep my fitness up, I really have no choice. And I think a lot of us, as we get into our middle ages and later ages, we're just faced with that. It's just really
Yep.
hard on your body to pound the pavement or even pound the trails. The other thing for most people is they have day jobs and lives and, things other
True.
than training. And
Yep.
so it can be much more efficient.
Exactly.
But I agree with you. If you have a goal, if you're running a race, a marathon, you need to get some experience outdoors in that environment to do it. So yeah,
Yep.
interesting. Okay. So let's talk about your altitude bike sessions because they are completely monk dialed, totally
Hmm.
controlled, totally meticulous, the same wattage, the same altitude, the simulated altitude, the same duration. But your outdoor runs have much higher variability depending upon how you're feeling, what the weather is, all that kind of stuff. So do you see these as complementary? Maybe this is kind of a redundant question because you just sort of said this with the treadmill.
Yeah.
But is there anything more to add to that then?
I say that bike is just another way of dialing in the engine. It's different than the treadmill for me. I use mostly for really high end stuff. The bike is the opposite. The bike is a way for me to add really low intensity, but like you're saying with injury, that's also something that I think about all the time is how do I get more bang for my buck in terms of training impact and stimulus versus injury risk. And the bike to me is, spinning around at low watts with altitude mask on is basically no injury risk. And there's definitely a bump in terms of training stimulus, just adding those, moderate zone 1 and zone 2 hours. Even taking the altitude mask out of it, I think that's a really good thing to do. And I've seen a lot more of that on mostly I'd say in the ultra trail world, but even in the track and field and marathoning world, I'm seeing more and more people taking the cross training side more seriously. It's just, if you're running 100, 140 miles a week, even it's not that much time. You're training maybe 2.5 hours a day of actual running time. And yeah, of course, like those guys are doing a lot of other stuff. They're working out in the gym, they're stretching, they're doing all the, recovery stuff between runs. But at the end of the day, you got plenty of time left. Has been my experience as when I was doing more running training. And so sure, why not add, another 50% volume just on the bike? There's really no risk. I don't see any downside in that. Especially if you keep the wattage low, like you're not going to develop some kind of musculature that's not needed for running. I think it's really just a gentle, low aerobic stimulus, which for pretty much anyone doing any kind of running is always a good thing. So yeah, I think it's something that I've found really helpful, and I think a lot of athletes are starting to see that. And then the altitude is even, we've done a whole podcast basically on that whole subject, but it's almost like a bonus at this point. There were, my first block or 2 blocks back from surgery here in Quito, like I didn't even have the altitude set up and was just doing the bike. But now I see it as, okay, not only am I getting that low end aerobic stimulus, but also I'm getting those higher altitude adaptations that I think make it easier for me to move quickly here at 3,000 to 5,000 meters on my mountains here in Quito, but they also make it much easier for me to transition to the really big mountains when the time comes. So yeah, it's just about getting creative, and I think not just relying on running. I think running is obviously, for a lot of us, that's why we do it. We love to run. We love to run through beautiful places, but I think both as you get older and as you become more and more competitive, you realize that in order to support that, you have to do things that aren't necessarily just running. Like I don't know any professional athletes who just run. Every single person is doing something else, whether it's in the gym, cross training, stretching, hiking, things like that. Running is obviously a huge part of it, but you have to, you have the more you train, the older you get, the better you get, the more non-running stuff you have to do just to support the running.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay. And lastly, as we always try and do, we try and do a little public service for the community at large. Since most of us don't have altitude tents, controlled training environments, a lot of us don't even have great access to things like treadmills. We don't have power meters. What would you say are the most important elements to control for or measure? And what can you let go of and just let vary without hurting your preparation and buildup as an amateur runner?
I mean, I think one of the hacks that I mentioned before is just find someone who's a little bit faster than you, and have them act as the treadmill. I mean, you could even have someone ride a bike. I know. I mean, Mr. C, you used to ride the bike with me back in the day in college, sometimes on long runs and stuff. So, you can absolutely have that kind of pacing effect where you're able to chase someone, and that is so much easier. Just find a buddy, find someone who's a little bit faster than you, and then say, hey, I really want to do this long run. I need to do it at this pace. Would you mind helping me out with that? Have someone bike with you. I think those are really, really helpful ways to do it. Just get creative. You can, like I said, at some point on this podcast, you could train in a stairwell. I have a guy in New York right now, Douglas, my athlete, who's training for a big run in the Alps, and we have him literally just going up and down his stairwell in Manhattan like a couple times a day. It's like 20 something stories. So, there's always things out there. Even if you don't have access to a gym, to a treadmill, whatever it is, there's ways that you can do that. But I would say, yeah, get creative, and then try and find friends, especially friends who are a little bit quicker than you, who are willing to help out. That makes the pacing side, that side so much easier. Or just go hop in a race, honestly. Doesn't have to be a super competitive thing. It can be your local 5K that costs $10 that you go register at the day of. And, that's a great way to go pace yourself, is just go chase someone in that race and have fun and run a little bit harder than you do normally. So I think it's, the control stuff, it can be really helpful. It's also like, you don't need to get obsessed with it. Especially if you're a beginner, you can get a lot out of just consistency, and just going out and moving every day, whether that's running or walking or hiking or biking or anything. So that's kind of my 2 cents.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Another podcast session is gone, unless you have anything more to add. Anything more you want to add?
No, I think we're good. I will read us out. So thanks everybody for listening. As always, please send any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, which is ty@chasky.run, or DM me, Tyler Sanders, on Instagram. And remember, you can read my raw training logs on my blog at tylersanders.com, or get that delivered to your inbox via Substack. Ty's Training is a Chasky Media production and brought to you by Chasky Endurance Collective, the world's leader in online coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.